example, is more of the way that this particular verse is phrased. That he was waiting patiently, but with close attention to what God was going to do. And then he speaks of it being fulfilled, that his waiting was not in vain, right? He inclined to me and heard my cry. From what, though, is the psalmist rescued?
Destruction.
I'm sorry?
Destruction.
Destruction, certainly, yes. He speaks of things that are things that can destroy, or of destruction specifically, eventually. What is the? I'm sorry?
He's being rescued from his own issues, the things that he's doing.
Okay, from his own. What do you mean by his own issues? Things.
His own sins.
Okay, his own sins. Yeah. Okay. I think that comes in subsequent verses more strongly. He speaks of his own iniquities later on. But here in the first few verses, what is he speaking of? From what did he need rescuing? It's a pit. He speaks of a pit. Out of the horrible pit, the miry clay. The words that are used to describe this pit actually refer to the nature of it as being a muddy, miry, slimy pit. Why would this be a thing that he would say he needs rescuing from? Is this literal or is this metaphorical? We can assume metaphorical. I mean, this is not something that literally happens to many people, at least not now. But it could have literally happened to him. There is a thing, sometimes when you experience a thing, maybe a rare thing, you realize exactly how terrible this sort of experience can be, right? This is the sort of thing that I would equate to maybe the sensation of drowning, right? If you've ever been stuck in the water and you don't think you're going to get out again, feel it closing over your head. It's this similar sort of despair, I think, that he's talking about here. Now, it can make an excellent metaphor, and it probably is metaphorical for most people that are going to use this psalm as a psalm of prayer, as a psalm of praise, people who sang this psalm in any sort of liturgical, worshipful sense as part of worship. But sometimes people write songs. Occasionally we have them in our own hymn book where they speak of things about drowning, experiences with storms. And when you have experienced it personally, it becomes a very powerful metaphor for you because you have a visceral remembrance of that experience. Now, in this case, pits, dangerous pits, were a much bigger hazard in this time and place than they are now. Now, it's not to say that it's common, that everybody was falling into them constantly. But what does Jesus talk about in the Gospels about when he needs an example of licit work to do on the Sabbath? What are you allowed to do on the Sabbath? What is his example that he gives to people so they'll understand what he's talking about? Pulling their animals out of pits. It happened, and it kills. Because once you get in, the experience he's describing is that you've fallen perhaps into an old cistern, something that is no longer used, but it's still muddy. There's not really water in it, maybe just a little bit, and you're stuck. You feel yourself sinking in, and you have trouble even pulling your limbs loose. There's nothing to grab onto. There's no way to climb out. And you're not even sure, perhaps, that anybody knows you're there. Will they ever find you? Who knows of your trouble? No one. And so this experience becomes an excellent way to turn into a metaphor, particularly if it is a personal experience, which it may have been. There's no knowing for sure of what it is that we need to rely on God for. Because in that circumstance, there is no way to save yourself. You become utterly dependent on someone else to rescue you. you're helpless. It is the definition of being helpless and at the mercy of those who may find or know who you are. It's a powerful thing, particularly, again, for anybody that has witnessed, seen, or experienced it. Yeah.
So that becomes a great metaphor for sin, because that's the way sin is. If this person is talking about, God rescued me from my sin here, then he describes it, a shepherd who's out in the field loses his sheep in a pit, and that would be something he's watching out for. And they even said that the crook of their staff that they used was meant, crooked or curved, was meant to rescue that animal.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So, you can see that. And then, like I said, in Jesus' time, he was saying, that's one thing you can do on the Sabbath. That was what they experienced, and they made that exception because that needed to be sometime done. And they even said if a stranger comes by and sees it, it would be a sin for him, or it'd be an error for him not to help rescue that animal and bring it back to its master. So, yeah, the use of God in this sense is very important.
Yeah, it's a powerful, and it can be our own sin, of course, our own foolishness, our own disregard of what we ought to be doing, where we ought to walk, straying from the prescribed path, or it could be a trap, right? People make pit traps, and it could be through no fault of our own, right? He talks later, and near the end of the psalm, about his enemies, those that seek to do ill, and he asks for God to help, thwart their plans, and this could be, again, the same sort of circumstance. So, speaking of the pit, it makes it, I was going to move on quite yet, the contrary metaphor is the rock that he speaks of in the next half. That God does, in fact, rescue him from the pit, and he sets his feet upon a rock. The idea, again, being that firmness and solidity. I have never been in a pit where I feared that I would never get out, but I have been in a swimming pool with the water over my head as a small child, and I remember the terror and the delight, the absolute relief of feeling the bottom of the pool beneath my feet when I got back to the shallower end. That absolute just joy, just so powerful. And this is, again, the feeling that he's speaking of, that sense of relief as you feel the rescue accomplished and being set back where your feet are firmly planted. And this is what God has done for him. So what then is the significance of the new song that he mentions then in the next verse? He speaks of being lifted out of the pit, set firmly upon firm ground, upon a rock, and given a new song. What's the new song got to do with this?
We have an expression that says, change your tune.
Okay. Change your tune. Yeah, I mean, in English idiom, that would be to say something different than what you were saying before. I think this is maybe a little different, but it is idiomatic, yes. Yeah.
It's giving him a new life, a new sense of being and ability to go on. Where in the pit, you were just thinking about, I'm drowning and I'm dead, and then he's rescued, now he's on firm ground, and he's praising God for it.
And that's the key. He has been given a new opportunity to praise God. Every time that you see this kind of phrase occur within the Psalms, speaking of a new song, it is essentially the idea that they view the new song as a new opportunity to glorify God. There is another reason, there is another chance, there is another place or time to glorify God with praise through song. That one of the things that they desire for God to help them for, one of the reasons to ask God for help, is so that I have more opportunity, more reasons for which to return praise to God. Because what do we exist for if not to glorify God? And when God acts on our behalf, we are then given more opportunities to exercise our purpose, to bring glory to God. And so the new song, rejoicing for having a new song, is not for yourself. It is so that I have now opportunity to glorify God and to praise him. And so as he has been rescued, now there is a new song for him to sing, a new thing that has happened in his life for which he can praise God. This is the joy that comes out of the troubles that we have, is that when God is with us in those times, we can then return that praise to him. Yeah.
And that's why we can look at the Old Testament and see it as an episodic saga, telling us all the good things that happen here and here and here, and all these different characters, and each one is an episode or something that happened, and it's raised up and fleshed out as an event. And then in their time, they told it again and again and again, so that in the New Testament, the apostles would say, or others would say, back in the Psalms, we heard the story of, and this is what happened. And it's huge that, in this, he gives that sense. The new song, and he goes on to say, I'm going to tell it, and everyone would hear, and everyone would know.
Exactly, and this is one of the other purposes of telling it over or having that public praise, is so that others can participate with us in praising God for these same things, which comes up subsequently. This is essentially a comment that some people would argue that the act of deliverance, and this was in some of the commentaries, it must include a subsequent praise of God, or it does not fully encompass the idea of what deliverance means within the biblical text. Now, to understand what a deliverance is that it is both the act of God and then the appropriate human response to that act of God. So, something to think about. So, who are the many? I did this with a couple of others. I don't have a verse after that. No, I didn't. But he speaks here, that's the wrong psalm. That would be, here we are. Many shall see it in fear and shall trust in Yahweh. Who are the many within this context?
All of those around him that are going to hear his praising God, saying, thank God for my deliverance, and share that experience, that deliverance with him because of that.
Yeah, I think that it certainly does encompass the other people that know him, people that are the Israelites, who see what has happened, who believe in God and are just given new reason, new purpose to praise. But I think it also encompasses those roundabout that do not believe in God, right? That seeing the powerful acts of God within your life can aid the unbelievers in coming to, if not full of belief and trust in God, then at least recognition and understanding of his power in our lives, right? That they will then see it in fear and then shall trust in Yahweh as, again, the hopeful outcome. And if they were not already part of the house of Israel, then they would not have that trust. They need to place their trust, their belief, their faith within God.
And when he says, fear the Lord, it's definitely directed at the enemies who will see this as an act in Israel. Again, God is acting and God's powerful. My gods can do nothing. There's another example of another person raised up by God. Now I need to consider, is this really a God? And know that. So not only those around him, but the other, he later talks about the adversaries or enemies that are troubling him.
Yeah, though I would say it's important to note that fear of God is enjoined for the people of God, not just the enemies of God as well. That a proper attitude towards God is a healthy fear and reverence for the power and control that he has. A recognition of his place versus our place. Yeah?
Fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
That is exactly right, yeah. That's, Scripture says that, fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
And you note that he's talking to the Israelites around him. He says trust. So he captions it as fear of God, which is that respect and honor and knowledge of God. But then he puts these that know God, put their trust in him. Mm-hmm. So it's not a fear of, the belt being spanked and hurt. It's respect is what he's meant in there, because they put the trust in God.
Well, and again, I think that fear of negative outcomes is not a wrong fear, right? I mean, there's the example of in the New Testament of having the proper, fear and respect of the civil and human authorities that exist, right? What is it? the line, they do not bear the sword for nothing, right? That they are appointed by God, and that it is important to show those proper kinds of fears and respect, and particularly to God. But accompanied with that is a knowledge of who God is, right? That if we have the proper fear, respect, knowledge of God, it will encourage us to not only be wary of those punishments, but to believe in those rewards and those mercies. Right? That both of those can be trusted in. That you can trust that God will be both just and merciful. That we need to be concerned about his justice and the fact that he will indeed follow through with what he says he will do. But part of what he says he will do is that he will be merciful to those who place their trust and their faith in him. And you cannot divide these things from each other. You have to have this fuller understanding of God's nature. He is not just one or the other of these things. I'm getting all off topic and ranting a little bit here, but too many people in our world nowadays try to split God's nature into one or the other. Right? To think of him as only being loving, without any element of holiness and sacredness and justness. And they think that he will simply overlook and ignore and not care about anything that we do because of his immense love, which is not true. And it is not true on the other end of the token, which you tend to see more with probably the angry atheist type, where they say that God is an evil and cranky old man in the sky just waiting for you to step out of line to smite you, which is also completely a mistaken and misguided idea of who God is, that leaves out his love and his care and his compassion to provide a way for us through and out of the sin that we have entangled ourselves in. And it's only when you put the elements of God or understand that he is more than just one or the other of these things that you have that proper picture and understanding of who he is, what's going on. All right, if I'm going to get out of the first 5 verses, I need to pick up my pace here. So, why contrast trusting God and the proud or those who chase a lie? So he speaks then of trusting in Yahweh. Blessed is the man who makes Yahweh his trust and does not respect the proud, nor such as turn aside to lies. Why is respecting the proud or those who chase falsehood? That one seems a little more obvious maybe on the face, but why is respecting the proud a bad thing?
Is it akin to how society treats our celebrities?
Probably. What do you mean by that, how society treats our celebrities?
Kind of put them on a pedestal, they go about like, they're all that in a bag of chips, and we confirm that.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think so. The idea that the proud are those that puff themselves up with the sense of their own importance, but within a religious context, we become self-reliant. Right? That we become proud, and when it says proud here, I think it means those who do not think they require God, who discount who he is. Yeah?
So 2 things. First off, pride in and of itself is not wrongful, but needs to be in moderation. But too much pride can lead to delusions of yourself, building yourself up bigger than you are, and creating more issues than necessary. My version also has a note in here saying instead of proud, it can be translated to enemies as well. So respecting those of your enemies as well as those involved in falsehood.
Yeah, those who are the enemies of God, certainly. I would...
Is there a difference in the word used? Because English likes to muddle things up really bad. Because I've always thought as pride, the sinful pride is wrong, period. But when we take pride in an accomplishment that we've been working on for a long time, I don't think that is sinful. Is there a different word for the two?
Not within English, and it becomes a difficult thing because we do use the idea of pride and being proud for I think what is an acceptable emotion, but one that we would distinguish from the idea of example is probably a better way to talk about this. If I say that I'm proud of my kids, what I intend to convey with that phrase is that I think that they have done something that is good or worthy or honorable, or that they have good character. They have good character. I'm proud of that. But what I need to be careful about with that phrase is to not attribute their good character to me. Their good character is a result of what I have done. Because it's not. It's not. Their good character is a result of either their own choices and the influence of God. Right? To take on pride, I think, is a bad and difficult and perilous thing, because the sin of pride is what led Satan to rebel in the first place. Believing that he could put himself into a place which he did not belong. Valuing or rating himself more highly than he should. And this is, boy, I'm really chasing a lot of rabbits today, but that's okay. This is why I don't think there's really a big deal when Moses writes in the Pentateuch that he was the most humble man that ever lived. Which on the face of it, we read that and we look at it and like, why would you write that about yourself? Can you write that about yourself and still be a humble guy? I think you can. I think you can. Because what the humility of Moses was knowing who he was, what he was called to do, and what his place in the world was. Understanding who he was as well as who he wasn't. This is the real and true humility. Because it is a terrible kind of false humility to put yourself down below where you ought to be. Because now you will not serve God with your talents the way that you ought to be. If I were to say to someone, no, I shouldn't teach a class. I'm really bad. I get up there and I stammer and I stutter and people don't really like listening to me and no one. That's not true. And you might say, well, he's just being humble. No, I'm not. It's a false humility that leads to me neglecting a gift and may even translate into a kind of secret pride about how I am not being so proud. It is a difficult and dangerous line to walk, but we need to try and do so to understand, what has God called me to do? And say, yes, I am fitted to do this thing. And to know, no, I'm not fitted to do that one. Right? I am not a song leader. I can't read music. I probably can't carry a tune very well, but I don't really know because I can't read music. I can't even tell sometimes. I sing, sure, I'm called to sing, but I know that is not a job for which I'm suited. It is not humility or false humility on my part to say that, because it's true. But I know that I do have some ability to teach. Now, how much is it? I'm not sure. I'm not that great. I mean, how many people are in the room? If I was really great, maybe more people would show up. I don't know. But the point is that it is such a difficult line to walk, to know how much I should value my talents at and what exactly I should be doing with them. But we all have to try and do that. What should I be doing with the gifts God has given me? And when I find that, I need to say, yes, I can do that when people ask me. Yes, that is something I am pretty good at. Am I the best? Probably not. There's how many billion people in the world? There's got to be somebody out there a little bit better at least. But that's okay. That's okay. This is what I'm called to do. And I think that this is what he's getting to with the proud, right? The people that think of their own abilities and think of themselves and do not think of God. Pride and proudness in that sense is anathema. We have this from God. The only reason I can do this is because God has appointed this for me to do and has given me some talent for me to do this. That's it. It's not because I'm so smart. It's not because I work so hard. It's not because I spend so many hours in study. All of these things come from God. And if I don't acknowledge that, then I am becoming proud, and we know what comes after that. Destruction. Yeah?
An easy way to deal with that is to not think about yourself. Focus on the task. As the saying says, it's amazing how much you can get done when nobody needs to take credit for it.
Yeah. I mean, and this is really the idea of humility, is the idea of selflessness, right? thinking about others. And that comes from that idea of, again, knowing what you are suited to do. Why am I doing this? Not because I should derive any great enjoyment or reward from it, but because I'm thinking about people in this room that might be able to benefit from the thing that I'm doing. I should care about that. And as long as that's happening, great. I'm on the right track. And I don't need to worry about anything else.
Yeah, less eyes and more U's.
Yeah. Others instead of self. And the more we do that, the more Christ-like we become. I mean, again, Christ in his humility laid aside his equality with God, right? Isn't this what this says in Paul's letters? He did not consider it a thing to be grasped, but instead took on form as a man and came to earth and suffered. Did he not know that he was God? Of course he did. Did he not know that he was the only man to live a perfect? Of course he knew. Did he not know that his death and resurrection would provide salvation for all of mankind? Of course he did. But it was not pride, right? Because he was doing the thing he was supposed to do, and he had a firm and a certain knowledge, more so even than Moses, of who he was and what he was to do. There was no sinful pride in that whatsoever. Because in his case, claiming to be God, just a bald statement of the fact. Yeah, all right. I didn't expect all this out of this one life, but I'm going to move on here. The phrase set in order, in the next verse down here, many things you have done, O Yahweh my God, your wonderful works and your thoughts toward us, they cannot be set in order to you, is a phrase that in different circumstances can either mean there's no comparison possible or that there's simply no way to count them. Either one would fit in this, though it makes an awkward phrasing in English, as we see. They cannot be set in order to you. And then he repeats, or says again, if I would declare and speak of them, they are more than can be numbered, which might indicate either it is no counting for the poetic repetition, or perhaps no comparison so that we contrast or elaborate with the idea that there are more than there are numbered. So that there is no comparison, they're the greatest things that can be done, and there are so many of them we cannot count them. But the phrase is ambiguous. So, the second half of verse 5 might be better read as when I will, instead of if I would declare and speak of them. The phrasing, again, is literally that, but the meaning or the understanding may be better understood as when I will, indicating the verb is, or the phrase is indicating that he is going to do this, rather than it being some sort of an uncertain conditional. But, yeah. I put this in there as a way of, I wouldn't have to actually, yeah. If I would declare and speak of them, they are more than can be numbered. So again, the idea being that when he does, if anyone were to try and number them, they would run out of time, right? It's just not possible. This is an interesting sacrifice and offering you have no delight in. My ears you have opened. You may have a different phrase in your translation. This is a section, did I put this in the next note? I didn't. This is a section that is quoted in the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, I believe. Let's flip over there, yeah. Hebrews 10, starting in verse 5, the writer of Hebrews, therefore when Christ came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me. With burnt offerings and sin offerings you were not pleased, etc. He quotes another verse. This is taken from this psalm, but you may have noticed that in Hebrews, but a body you prepared for me, it says. That's the Greek, and it's actually in the Greek Septuagint translation of the Old Testament. That's what it says. It does not say ears. The literal phrase in Hebrew is, ears you have dug for me, which is a wild kind of phrase. I love it. I love it very much. Several theories about this exist as to what happened here. One of them is that there was an error in the Greek transcription. I don't speak or read Greek, but essentially that you see the word there becoming something else through an error in clerical work. or that the Hebrews reading, as it was written in the Greek for the writer of Hebrews in that letter, eventually crept back into the versions of the Greek Old Testament, Septuagint, that exist. That's not held by a lot of people. Most people don't think that's very likely at all. But the most common understanding is that this is actually an idiom. The Greek is the idiom translated for sense. This is an idiom that is lost to us. We don't really have this idiom or other examples of it from the Hebrew, but if it is an idiom, essentially it is using the idea of ears as a stand-in for the body, our person, which is the sort of idiom that people use in all kinds of languages, where you have one part of the body as an element for the whole, right? We speak of God's hands, referring to all the things that God does. Right? This is the sort of thing that does. And it seems to be that, again, ears you have dug, or a body you have prepared. Now, the other reason this makes sense to me is, if we think about Adam, how was Adam formed? How is that described in Genesis? From the dust of the ground, right? From the dirt of the earth. And so the idea that God has dug ears for someone, creating them out of the dirt, is in line with the idea already of the way this is described in Genesis. And so if you were to create this idiom, it seems to work. At any rate, that is kind of the prevailing idea. Yeah?
My translation says, "But my ears you have opened."
Yep.
And the sense is that I can hear you now. Now I understand. Because he goes on to say, sacrifices and all that don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
My relationship to you is because God is telling me what is right, what is true, what makes up faith, what makes up worship. He's letting me know. So it's not the ones he talked about before in verse 4, those who are proud and only look to themselves, or those who turn to false gods. He says, no, God has opened my ears. Now I got that relationship.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of putting it, and I think the NIV, I don't know if you're using the NIV, the NIV says that too. You have opened my ears. Next page. Oh, too many pages turned.
Verse 6.
Yeah, I just turned too many pages. Yeah, ears you have opened. But the phrase itself, again, I'm getting to the end of time. I've gotten here and I don't want to spend too much time on it. The phrase itself is literally ears you have dug. And so it is, I mean, different people can argue about this. I don't think we have to necessarily come to an agreement. The interesting thing about this, of course, is this is appearing in Hebrews as the quotation. And the speaking of these sacrifices and offerings, the Israelites would actually make literal sacrifices in order to praise God. Right? Part of the elements of praising God involved making sacrifices. And then, did I put a note in here? I didn't. There's in Hebrews 13:5, it speaks of making sacrifices of praise to God, which is an interesting thing to bring back when he's speaking of sacrifices not being wanted. And there's a shift in the type of sacrifices that are made. So anyways, Hebrews 13 is very interesting to read in light of these verses here and the idea of that shifting with the coming of Christ. But why does God not want sacrifice and offering? This is going to have to probably be the last thing we do. But what is it that he doesn't want, doesn't like about that? Did he not institute them? Yeah.
But the heart isn't involved. It's just ritual.
Yes.
He doesn't want that.
Absolutely.
The heart is.
Absolutely. He does not want just the outward forms.
More sincere worship.
Yes. He wants us to worship him sincerely and for us to have that attitude. And the outward elements of that should come from it and not try and go the other way around. Right? We don't want to create those and then have them become an empty shell that is hollowed out, right? This is Jesus speaking of the whitewashed tombs, right, of the Pharisees, that they have the acts that are prescribed in the law, but they have nothing of the heart of it inside of them that loves God and seeks to please him. That is a shift. And we see this already in Psalms and throughout the prophets, in fact, in the Old Testament, that God is already hammering on this topic with the Israelites. that they need to not be so concerned with following the letter of the law as they are with following God with their whole heart, which will then lead them to follow the law properly. That if they have the heart for God first, if they have the love for God and seek after have the desire to seek and do His will, then the other things will stem from that rather than going the other way around. All right, I got a little adamant there. Sorry, I didn't mean to shout at you. All right, I am out of time. I've seen some small children walk by in the back hallway there. Yeah, there's my Hebrews 13:15. Such an interesting phrase, sacrifice of praise, given the context of him talking about no more sacrifices being required. But any other thoughts, comments? Something that I didn't quite get to. I know that there was lots more in here, but all right. Well, I appreciate everybody's time and attention. As I said, one more psalm before I take a short interlude, and then we'll pick up book 2 after that. But one more week. Thank you all very much for your time.